Welcome back. Welcome to episode 4 of the Boiler Shed, of converting this space into a furniture making, traditional woodworking workshop, and eventually a school of heritage crafts. I spent a surprisingly long time trying to decide on a colour. This colour is an accent colour of the wall, but also will be the kind of branding colour of the school. The school is going to be incorporated as a separate company to HT Morris Furniture, and this colour will be the logo and kind of what will become recognisable and make you think of the school. I did an Instagram poll which ended up getting quite a lot of responses. I was torn between a colour called Lobster, which was more of a burnt orange kind of colour, and this, which is Hive, and I'm actually really glad we voted for Hive in the end. I think it's lovely. A big part of making this workshop a positive feeling space, like I spoke about in the previous episode, which doesn't seem like to a lot of people the most necessary thing to be getting in straight away, but for me it's quite important, is my sound system. These are old Pioneer speakers. My dad bought these speakers when he was younger than me now, 40 odd years ago, and I've been using them in my room at home, but they're a little bit too big for that space and they're going to fit in here perfectly. So the first job was putting a little shelf up which will hold the amp, and then I could start thinking about wiring the speakers in. The one speaker had a bit of damage on the back, on the spring clips that hold in the speaker cable, so I had to end up drilling through the back of the speaker and kind of hardwiring in the speaker cable. It was actually much easier than I thought. I'd love one day to make new cabinets for these speakers. Not something I've ever really done before, but I think will be a nice project at some point to do. These speakers sit up high on these little brackets. Luckily, there's quite high walls in here, so they fit really nicely, and I think they're going to fill the space really well. Because I'm planning to make new cases for them, I did end up just screwing straight through the bracket into the bottom of the speakers. They're quite heavy, so for the sake of safety as well, I wanted to have them mounted on the brackets rather than just sat on top. Fortunately, I could tuck all the speaker cable on the top of the wall where the corrugated sheet meet the top of the wall. So it was really neat. I didn't really have the need to hide any cables other than doing that. It was then just a case of wiring them into the amp as you would normally, and I have a Bluetooth receiver that I use for my phone, which is going to sit neatly on top of the amp. I do plan to put another socket up by the amp so I don't have to run the cables down into the socket below. I'm just going to tap into that socket that we've put in and bring a socket up level with the amp. The next thing I did was go and get a doormat. After I'd laid the floor and done the varnish, the yard outside is often quite muddy after it's been raining, and I was getting quite paranoid about all the mud and trailing the mud through and kind of rubbing it into the floor. I know I'll probably get over that quite quickly once work starts happening in here, but I thought I'd get a nice big doormat. Obviously, after already cutting the bottom off the door didn't open with the doormat in place, so I ended up, which was Freya's idea actually, I ended up letting in the doormat and having it flush with the floor. It's a really nice, quite permanent feeling feature when you come in. it was nice to see that these sheets are actually quite easy to pull up. Because of what I've done with the junction boxes and the cable running underneath the floor, I know I will have to pull up the odd sheet eventually, and this kind of showed me that it's actually not too much work. It's just that they're heavy. That's the only real issue. This process was surprisingly easy, just kind of marking around it and cutting it out. The only fiddle was the insulation I've laid on the studs is thinner than the studs are, so I had to put in some packing material between the studs on top of the insulation to make sure the mat lays nice and flat. Fortunately, the offcut from the ply is just about the right thickness that I could just kind of chop that up and wedge it in. I do plan to cut off that excess damp-proof membrane that's coming up around the floor at some point, although I've not decided whether I'm going to put a skirting on yet, so for now I'm just leaving it. And of course I had to give the new doormat a quick test run. This bench I made when I first built this workshop when I was 16, so 5 years ago now. I built it in the workshop and I never meant it really to come out, so it was a bit of a job. Stood on end, it's actually taller than that workshop was, and it didn't fit down the side without taking the big vise off. We put it on a little set of sack trucks to wheel it down the side, although he's not actually too heavy. This was made out of leftover floor joists from when I built the first workshop. These are big 6x2s, but they're pine, so he's not too heavy, but he is quite long. He's 2.5 meters long, so luckily I could just about get it in the car without the back closed, of course. It's fortunate to have my dad to help me. This is the kind of thing that I just wouldn't be able to do on my own. Ended up having to be quite thoughtful and intentional movements with this kind of thing because it's so long, and I didn't want to damage the car or the bench. Each movement is kind of worth, know where you're going, know where you're picking up from, and kind of be able to predict how the bench is going to move. Something else we did this week, which was really a bit of fun, but also kind of a necessity, I'm going to tell myself. My brother and I were lucky enough to inherit a small piece of land down the road from here, and there's been this fallen ash tree for as long as I can remember. It's always been there. He has got quite a lot of fungus and has started to rot in a lot of places, so I don't think there's much usable timber in there, but I wanted a stump to chop kindling on, so it was a good excuse to use the chainsaw. Sam could lift it, luckily, and yeah, just a nice little fun activity. We like to spend time down the field whenever we can. This is the old workshop, by the way. I wanted to bring the bandsaw over. You'll see why I needed it in a second, but it will of course live in the machine room next door at some point, and I do intend on getting a big 3-phase resaw bandsaw, but I do like this bandsaw and he does do a good job, so I wanted to get it over there to kind of make this space somewhat usable as soon as possible. Luckily this is something I can lift on my own, so it's really not too bad. There's a kind of list of upgrades I want to make to this bench. Initially I intended to have this bench as kind of a layout table and just have it around and build myself a nice new bench. But after bringing it here, I actually realised that I do still love that bench. So I'm just going to make a few upgrades and keep it. It had this very heavy vise that we had to take off before we moved it, and this other end vise. This end vise is a bit shit, really. He's very lightweight, and I don't really want to put it back on that bench, so I'm going to get a new end vise. There's a couple of big coach bolts missing. I think me and my brother nicked a couple when we were a few short building something at the field, so I've replaced those. The bench is still nice and strong. I'm not too worried about the construction of it. The top is the main thing I wanna change. So the top needs flattening, as well as I'm gonna put a new edge on it. So the front edge, the edge that faces you when you're working, is bruised and cut into and all sorts. So I'm going to rip off around 40mm and put a hardwood edge on it and plane it flush. That'll give it a nice new crisp kind of feeling to it when I put the big vise back on. Took my nice old 4-plane and started flattening. I flattened this bench a couple of times because it's cheap CLS joists. It doesn't stay flat whatsoever, and it's never been in an insulated workshop, so it should be a little better in here, but I don't imagine it'll stay overly flat, but I'll give it a good chance. The top had linseed oil on it, so he's gone very yellow and worn, and I did sharpening on it as well, so you can see the black spots, and it's nice to have a new surface on it. I used the track saw again that I've borrowed to rip the edge off. I did this in 2 cuts because the top is reasonably thick. He's 50mm thick. But the track saw leaves such a fantastic finish. It'll be good enough to put the strip straight on once I've milled up a strip of oak. Flattening the top isn't a lot of fun, but it was nice to be making shavings and feel like I was doing a bit of woodworking in the new workshop for the first time. It kind of felt like construction work up until now. It didn't take too long to get this top flat, or flat enough. Because this pine, I could take quite heavy shavings. This blade has quite a camber into it, so I've obviously left myself with a scalloped surface, which I will plane with a smoothing plane at some point when I'm at that stage. Another upgrade that I wanted to do was just to paint the base of it. He was never properly finished because it was up against a wall in the other workshop. This bench was more than half the length of my old workshop, so it was quite a prominent feature and was anchored in place and never moved. So I've never really seen this side of it. I actually had forgotten I'd put those angled braces on it. I'm using a paint called Smokehouse. The colour is from Cornish Mineral Paints. It's a milk paint. It's lovely, and the same company as the yellow paint, Cornish Mineral Paints. I really like milk paint. It's something I've not really used before, but I think it's a really lovely thing. I'm going to try and incorporate it in a few different things in here. The next thing was to bring over my toolbox. This toolbox I made last year to kind of take between workshops. It is intended to be a mock-up, but I think it will remain as it is for a while. Thank you so much for all the support and comments and the sharing of these videos. I'm really enjoying making them. They are a little bit of work, but I think they're a valuable resource to share, as well as valuable to me to look back on in years to come. So thanks for watching.